Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Gavin Vandenberg. I represent the US Africa Trade Desk, and thank you for joining today's part 5 of our 7-part series, Navigating the Regulatory Matters in the United States. So today we have a very special guest that is going to be doing the presentation, a lady that I met through Prosper Africa. Her name is Shakwana Teasley, and she goes by the name Shak, only if she allows you to go by the name Shak, but she'll introduce herself shortly. And she is really a fantastic expert and a real great asset to have within the Prosper Africa ATI USATD USAID arsenal, to be able to help you as producers navigate some, highly complex and regulatory matters. So as you know, the US Africa Trade Desk offers a free service to do the basic FDA registration with you. And that's just a very basic registration. Now, just because you've got an FDA registration number, that only really starts the journey. And really what you need to do is understand the route to market and understand the regulatory matters that you need to focus on. Before I hand over to Shak, you will see that there is, in today's presentation, you will see that there is specific focus, not just generically on product from Africa, but there is also some real good specific focus on analyzing the products that you might be sending if you're from an AGOA eligible country. And I think that is critically important to understand. Just because the country is AGOA eligible doesn't necessarily mean that the product itself will be 100% AGOA eligible. You really need to delve deep into the content of your product and understand exactly what it is. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Shak, and she'll be running today's presentation. Thank you very much. Over to you, Shak.
Thank you, Gavin, for the warm introduction, and thank you all for having me. Happy to have you also. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Today, we're going to talk about the part 5 of navigating regulatory matters. So before we do that, I like to make sure that you all know who I am, know my background, so you feel comfortable with your educator. So my name is Shakwana Teasley. Everyone knows me as Shak. I have been in the industry for 20 years, and I have worked every area of supply chain, global logistics, and international trade. I have my master's in labor relations. I am a certified customs specialist, and I am also a duty drawback specialist. So just going to give you a little bit of a background about me. So my office is currently in the Atlanta area of Georgia in the United States, but I am born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I started my career at what's called Yellow Transportation. People know it to be a trucking company, but it is actually a freight forwarder doing business in the Caribbean. Can't believe that was actually 20 years ago. Working there, I began to learn all of the regulations and customs requirements to export goods to the Caribbean from the US. So that gave me some expertise in the export section distinct to customs regulations. I've worked there for approximately 2 years, and I moved on to begin to work in chemicals for a company here called Arch Chemicals, but later became Lonza. That organization made chemicals for rocket propellant, for NASA, pool chemicals, makeup chemicals. So I am also a chemical expert specializing in the movement of dangerous goods all around the world by every mode of transportation. So I was very excited when I worked there because I actually got to work on rocket propellant that went into satellites that were launched by NASA. And if you didn't know, anything that actually leaves our atmosphere, if it leaves the planet Earth, it is still considered an export. I worked there for about 5 or 6 years, and then I moved on to work for Mizuno, which is a Japanese company specializing in sporting goods. So golf clubs, footwear, apparel, textiles, baseball gloves, etc. In that role, I began to work on what's called foreign trade zones, which are warehouses that are on foreign soil in the US. I was classifying the goods and specializing heavy into footwear and apparel. Was very grateful to get that experience. Then I moved on to the Home Depot corporate office. The Home Depot corporate office was very different. They don't manufacture anything, but they're one of the largest importers in the world of goods from all around the world. So in that role, I began to be more of an international trade compliance expert, advising on customs regulations and ensuring compliance for customs requirements. Worked there for a few years, and then I got a call to relocate to Connecticut to Sikorsky Aircraft. That is the manufacturer of the Black Hawk helicopter, Coast Guard helicopters, the presidential helicopter. They were eventually acquired by Lockheed Martin, which is the largest defense contractor in the world. And in that role, I began to manage international trade globally for Department of Defense articles. Very exciting to learn Department of Defense articles as well. I consider myself to be highly blessed and favored. I was able to get all three of my college degrees and all of my certifications for absolutely free. Every job I worked said yes, they would help me pay for school, and I thank God every day for it sincerely. I got my associate's degree from Kingsborough Community College. I went on to Queens College and then got my master's degree from the University of New Haven, along with the credentials I've already explained. I think that's very important to tell people. I started my own organization approximately 5 years ago, so that way I can now give back to the community and ensure that they have the regulatory expertise that they need to excel in this industry. So today we're going to go through our agenda. I think it's very important that you understand what we're going to discuss so you can allocate your time and think about the questions that you want to ask in the end. So first, we're going to go over an overview of FDA and USDA regulations. Then it's very important to understand the steps. Anytime I do a webinar or any type of education, because Agate Solutions is an accredited education institute, it's extremely important to me that I give you steps to achieve whatever we're here to do today. Because I don't want to just talk to you in a webinar. I want you to be able to take these tools back to your organization and actually execute and use what I've taught you today to make a difference in your organization. After we talk about the steps to achieve compliance, we're going to understand what is an import of record and what is their responsibility so that you understand how to manage your stakeholders. But also, if you are an import of record, you understand all of your requirements as well. We're going to recap at the end, and I'm going to ensure that we leave at least 10 to 15 minutes for questions. So that way, if you need any further support, you have someone that could give you some guidance. So that's an overview of today's topics. So let's begin with our overview of FDA and USDA regulations. Oftentimes, people jump right into education, but they never tell people actually what is the terminology. That's extremely important to me because you have to be able to walk the walk if you want to talk the talk. You have to be able to be in the rooms talking to government agencies using the correct terminology to ensure that the government agency can answer the questions that you need properly. But if you don't ask the questions properly because you don't know the right terminology, people don't really know how to help you. So let's first talk about what is international trade, imports versus exports. We're going to talk about import agents and international trade agents. So what are they exactly? So first, let's discuss what is international trade. People get this particular thing wrong. They say that international trade is just the trade of goods all around the world. It's way more than that. International trade also includes services. You can export a service and you can import a service as well. International trade has a huge impact on the overall global economy, the GDP, and then local economies as well. I tell people all the time that you being in the trade industry is such a big deal that goes unnoticed because being in international trade gives you the opportunity to actually make an impact on the economy, whether you're buying goods, selling goods, manufacturing goods, you're all part of the supply chain. And the supply chain literally is a link of every single aspect of the movement of goods all around the world. And a part of that is international trade as well. So let's talk about what is a import agent. When people are working with an import agent, they automatically assume that they are now going to be working with someone that is a customs broker. That is not always the case. Your import agent is your liaison. They should be giving you some information in regard to what are your requirements and some barriers you should maybe need to consider. But it generally is not the case that import agents are also the same stakeholder that's going to clear your good through customs. So you want to be very careful in having that assumption, because you never want to go into that thinking that that is the case and then they don't meet your expectation and you find yourself not being in compliance with regulations. Sometimes people get confused when they talk about imports versus exports. So my dialogue changes often depending on who I'm talking to. If I am in Africa and I am talking to an African country, I'm sorry, an African company or an African government agency, I am going to discuss the export out of the region. However, when I'm in the US and I am talking about an export that is coming out of Africa into the US, I am not going to say an export. I am going to discuss it as an import, because they need to understand that this is actually coming into the US market, the US commerce for consumption. So be very careful when you're talking to someone in a foreign country, meaning outside of the US, you're discussing an export out. When you're discussing the goods coming into the country and you're talking to the US government, you want to be explaining to them that you have an import coming to the US commerce. Make sure your dialogue is on point and it makes sense, because you do not want to confuse the government agencies that you are talking to, because they will give you regulations and guidance based on the terminology that you are using in those discussions. So, next, for terminology, it's important that you understand what is a PGA. PGA is also referred to as OGA. It means partnering government agency. OGA means other government agency. What that means is there are government agencies that support U.S. Customs to ensure that your goods are in compliance and can clear customs. Oftentimes people say, my goods have been stuck in customs. My goods are stuck in customs. And when I do the research, I find out they're stuck in FDA, they're stuck in USDA, they're stuck in EPA. Their goods has never even made it to customs yet. When you are thinking about the exportation of your good out of the country to come into the US market, keep in mind that before your goods ever reach customs for review, you have to first be in compliance with the partnering government agency, also known as the other government agency. And that's why we're going to deep dive today into the topics of those agencies today, distinct to FDA and USDA. Acronyms like CBP is used often. I'll tell you right now, in the world of trade and government, you're going to hear a lot of acronyms. So I'm going to take out your phone. I want to give you a QR code that you can actually get acronyms that are commonly used. And here's that QR code: PGA, CBP, CFR, COA, IOR. People speak like this all the time, and you want to be able to keep up quickly with what's being said to you so you can get the instructions and directions you need to hit commerce. So please take this QR code, scan it, and you will be able to download trade acronyms that are commonly used in our day-to-day language. So when we're talking about USDA and FDA, there are lucrative opportunities. The opportunities are endless when you're talking about coming into the US market. But everyone sees the end result of coming into the US market and being able to sell their goods and be extremely profitable. But people don't often think about the compliance of that. And if you're not in compliance with government agencies, then you find yourself being put in a position where you are never going to make it to the market because you're not in compliance. And that is extremely costly. We want to avoid that by all means. So when we talk about lucrative opportunities, the US market offers significant potential for importers looking to capitalize on their consumer brand. So you want to be able to get into the US market, but you don't want to do it in a way that puts your business in jeopardy, where you're no longer attractive to buyers in the US market. So you have to understand market trends, consumer preferences that can enhance profitability, but you also want to be able to navigate the complexity. And do you need to be an expert? No, they're trade experts, they're import agents like myself. I'm a compliance expert, customs expert. You want to make sure that you have in part of your team someone, it doesn't have to be internal, it can be external, that can help you navigate the complexities. People don't often know that you can actually clear your goods through customs before they actually arrive in the US market. People attempt to do the clearance process to clear their goods through customs and the other government agencies, not realizing they could have done that probably about 5 days prior to the goods arriving. Because once they get to the market, the time starts to tick. And at that point, you only have a short window to meet all of the customs requirements and get these goods into the market. The U.S. import process is governed by numerous of regulations from various agencies, and it can be totally overwhelming. When you think of U.S. Customs, look at it as a parent-child relationship. There is Homeland Security, and then there's U.S. Customs. And then as cousins to U.S. Customs, there's several U.S. government agencies that you have to be in compliance with, or you can find yourself in serious consequences. Those consequences can be delays, financial penalties, and financial penalties are huge. I'm talking about fines. Your goods can potentially be seized, but also consider if you have a relationship with a buyer in the US that is committed to buying your goods, now you run the risk of that buyer still wanting to do business with you because you might have now identified yourself as a risk. So, as we talk about the importance of regulatory compliance, I want you to understand some of the steps along the way that you should be taking into consideration as you build out your project plan or your supply chain strategy. You want to avoid costly delays. Costly delays can be avoided by just making sure your documentation is accurate. Making sure what you submit to FDA and USDA has everything you're supposed to have on it. And I'm going to walk you through a case study where I show you how that process works and what those documents are that are being exchanged between the import agent, the person that's representing you in trade, and then what you're going to be receiving too as the company in a foreign market to the US. So you could avoid costly supply chain delays by just making sure your documents are in compliance, right? You want to prevent financial penalties. A lot of people are still in the very early stages of exporting their goods, and they have put a great deal of capital and business savings to this first transaction. And the last thing you want is for your goods to be returned to origin because you were in non-compliance. You want to protect yourself against fines and seizures. What you probably did not know is there's something called general order in the US. And what that means is if you do not clear your goods in the substantial time, your goods can go into what's called general order. It's like a warehouse that US Customs has. But if your goods go into general order, I want you to understand that is a very serious situation. Because if your goods become seized by customs for non-compliance, the other alternative, your goods can potentially be auctioned into the US market and sold for whatever it sells at an auction. And just like that, your product is lost. You can navigate it back. It's now in the US market. So if it was a sample or proprietary information, if it's still in the development stages, that product is now floating through the market where you probably really didn't want it out yet. So that's a very serious thing when you're talking about launching your goods in regard to USDA and FDA related products. You want to enhance your market reputation. You want buyers to see you as not just a great quality product. You want your market reputation for your buyers to be someone that actually has the necessary relationships, that they work with people to ensure that they are in compliance. Because when people see that you're not in compliance, it looks like you don't do your due diligence and your house is not in order. You don't ever want to reduce your relationship, the quality of your relationship, just because you just didn't know how to do documentation to get FDA and USDA approval. Facilitating market access, promoting safety and quality, streamlining operations. I want to talk about streamlining operations in regard to USDA and FDA, because when you're walking through the process to actually move your goods into the US, you should have a supply chain and trade strategy that actually lays out who is going to be your steamship line, where are you going to move, who are you going to move it with, particularly for food and USDA requirements. That's extremely important because they're highly regulated. So when you streamline your operations, you want to lay out what compliance you have to be in compliance with, what regulations apply to you. People find themselves overwhelmed often because they think they have to be in compliance with so much, when most times there are a distinct 5 to 10 regulations that only applies to your product. What applies for a mango may not be the same qualification for a corn dog. What applies for a raw material like a watermelon may not be the same thing for coffee or nuts that have gone through a manufacturing process. So taking someone else's process and operations and trying to streamline it is probably good for benchmarking to get started, but you need something customized to ensure that you know what regulations you have to adhere to. You won't want to end up in legal risk. You want to be able to mitigate those from even happening before you even come into the US market. And then the last thing, which is the most severe, is the revocation of an import license. That is very real. I tell people this all the time. Just like a driver's license is a privilege, it is not a right, and neither is an importation into the US market. The import license can be revoked from an importer of record, prohibiting them to import goods into the United States. And we want to never have that happen. So let's get into an FDA overview. Exactly are your FDA and governing regulations? So when you're talking about FDA, I want you to understand there are many different types of regulations, and they're usually referred to as the CFR. CFR is another acronym that if you got that QR code, you're going to get these acronyms. CFR stands for Code of Federal Regulations. We have 19 CFR, which is customs regulations. We have 22 CFR, 29 CFR, and the list can go on. You want to make sure that you understand what regulations in the CFR that are FDA regulated only applies to your product. The FDA is known, of course, you'd already know it's the Food and Drug Administration, but it's a federal agency, and their job is to protect public health. Sometimes I have clients call me about food related products, and they're concerned that they can't meet FDA guidelines, and they're more concerned with the quality of the good. When we're talking about FDA regulations, this is not about quality, this is about security. I want to repeat that. You want to have the right quality for your buyers, right? You want the right buyer to want your good. But when you're talking about FDA and government regulations distinct to FDA, we're talking about security of food, drugs, medical devices, cosmetics, and tobacco products. If you fall within this criteria, then you want to know what regulations apply to you. Those regulations are Title 21 of the CFR is reserved strictly for the rules of food and drug. And remember, CFR is the Code of Federal Regulations. You have to know the acronyms because often people just speak to you that way, assuming that you understand what they're saying to you. So you have to understand the relationship between customs, FDA as a PGA, and the responsibilities of the FDA. So first, what is the responsibility for food safety? Now, we're going to talk more about this relationship between customs because I want you to understand it and the process in which it works. Before you even get to customs, you must satisfy these FDA requirements because FDA is considered the PGA to customs, and that is partnering government agency. So let's go over your food safety. Regulatory oversight. The FDA is going to have complete oversight over your food product. That excludes meat, poultry, processed egg products, which are often overseen by USDA. Different government agency, different requirements. People call me all the time and tell me that they're having an issue with FDA in regard to their meat. And the first thing I say is, you're not dealing with FDA, you're having a USDA issue. Okay. You should be very familiar with what's called the FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act. Do you need to memorize that? No. Do you need to know that it exists? Absolutely. It focuses on preventing food safety issues. So when people think they're having an issue with FDA, sometimes they don't realize that the issue that they're having is just making sure that that they are in compliance with safety issues that fall under this Modernization Act. And there's several modernization acts, but this is the one that is distinct to FDA. It mandates comprehensive preventive controls for food facilities. Standards for produce safety. It establishes standards for the safe growing, harvesting, packing, holding of fruits and vegetables. I want to strongly emphasize safety. I think as consumers, we hear safety and we think about slips and falls and injury. When we're talking about food, particularly in the area that we're looking right now, I want you to understand that things can happen in the harvesting stage, in the packing stage, and when you're holding fruit and vegetables, that can make it unsafe to consume internally. And the FDA wants to ensure that they are regulating that. So now let's talk about the drug and cosmetic safety under those same guidelines. So for a drug approval process, the FDA evaluates new drugs for safety and effectiveness before they can be marketed. You've probably seen drugs that you see often says not FDA approved or under FDA review because you're still going through the process. And throughout that process, there are clinical trials and post-market surveillance that are required. Cosmetic regulation ensures that cosmetics are safe for use and accurately labeled. While cosmetics do not require FDA approval before marketing, they must not be misbranded or adulterated. Let me explain that some so you can understand it operationally. I expressed to you that I worked for a chemical company. People think chemicals are always these harsh, bad chemicals, but also keep in mind that many of the cosmetic brands that we know and love that we use in makeup, facial washes, they do have some type of chemical inside of these products. Often, some of these products also have food or drug hit FDA regulations because they also have a food product in it. There is a facial wash I love very much, and it has citric in it. And the citric is actually coming directly from a citric fruit. It is subject to FDA because it's actually food, not for consumption, but still it's going to be having to go to the necessary food and safety and the drug and cosmetic safety to ensure that it meets FDA guidelines. So if you're here and you're in the cosmetic industry, let's keep that in mind. Not that you have to change the product formulation, but you have to be in compliance with the regulations that oversee that area of your particular product. Classification and approval for medical devices. The medical devices are categorized into three classes based on your risk. Again, risk sometimes is also seen as safety. You have class one being the absolute lowest risk, and class three being the highest risk. There's the same criteria when we're talking about the potential for hazardous materials or dangerous goods. The class three devices are required to be pre-marked approval by PMA. PMA is not your post-market surveillance, but it is an approval process that working with FDA directly and understanding what those are will give you the guidance that you need to make sure you're in compliance. Post-market surveillance. The FDA monitors devices that can reach the market to identify any issues that may arise. So I think that people often hear government agencies and they get very like standoffish and they find themselves saying, I don't really want to be a part of that. I don't want to be involved. I don't, I'm, they find themselves scared. But the FDA, the USDA, customs as a whole considers themselves a partner in trade. Let me repeat that. Customs as a whole considers themselves to be a partner in trade. What does that mean? Customs wants to partner with you before you actually import or export your goods to help give you the guidance that you need to not find yourself in the areas of mitigation or fines or seizures or having goods auctioned. So don't look at this and find yourself being fearful. Instead, dive in with the understanding that you now have a partner in trade and then utilize all the other resources that you have, like the U.S. Africa Trade Desk and Prosper, U.S. Aid, myself, of Agate as a partner as well. Here's some overview of some relevant laws. First, we're going to talk about the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Again, we have another acronym, FFDCA. These acronyms are used so common, you just got to get used to them, and that sometimes that happens naturally. I don't like to deep dive too much into the history of our regulations, but you need to know that they exist because they often have changes and they have revisions. Sometimes those are annual, sometimes they're every 5 years, sometimes they're every 10 years. It just depends on what government agency that we're talking about. But you should know how long something has been in place. So, in regard to the FFDCA, it was enacted in 1938. What does it do exactly? It provides the FDA with the authority that it needs to even oversee this stuff. So how does a government agency oversee? It has to have some type of regulation that gives them the authority to oversee the transaction. It establishes standards for labeling, safety, and efficiency of these products. Next, let's talk about the Food Safety Mod Act. We talked about it a little bit before. I'll tell you now, people generally don't say modernization. You often hear just Mod Act, Food Safety Mod Act, or they'll say FSMA. If you hear FS Mod Act, it's the same thing. Passed in 2011. What does it do? It represents a significant overhaul of food and safety laws. Why did we have to have an overhaul of food and safety laws? For safety. We want prevention of food safety hazards. We want to make sure that what we consume is safe. So these provisions include mandatory preventive controls for food facilities, enhanced authority of FDA to conduct inspections, and increased focus on import safety. Drug approval amendments. These amendments are established as requirements for the clinical testing and approval for new drugs. This is extremely important. We don't want to just consume new drugs, right? So if you're an importer or exporter, keep in mind that you need to allocate the necessary time to go through these approval processes. We want to make sure the drugs are proven safe before they actually enter the market. Medical device amendments. These are the amendments set forth from the regulatory framework for the approval prices. This includes the provisions for pre-market. That's your 510K and PMA processes. Nutrition Labeling and Education Act is usually just called the NLEA. People generally do not say the whole thing out. This requires food manufacturers to provide nutrition labels and prohibits misleading claims about nutritional content for food products. I've had a client that was stuck in this area for an extended period of time. By the time they reached me, they could not figure out what they were missing because they were in compliance with so many other things. And by the time I met them and started to deep dive into what the issue was, it was all labeling, all labeling. They worked with someone within their foreign country and they had all the labeling requirements for their home country, their domestic country. And they did not take the time to see if those same labeling requirements would meet the labeling requirements of the US. The good thing is they were able to make those necessary adjustments and they still had a great buyer relationship to continue the product. The product was a great quality product, but this could have gone very differently and been very costly as well. Here's the overview, more of an overview of some of the relevant laws. So we're talking about the food safety standards. Here are more acronyms again: HSCCP, the hazard analysis and critical control points. Good manufacturing practices, GMP. Food safety, we already talked about the Food Safety Mod Act. Labeling requirements, nutritional labeling, ingredient lists, allergen information. Import alerts and compliance. Detention without physical examination, DWPE. There's also something called a VASIX exam, which is where customs just randomly pulls freight at a port to randomly inspect it for safety reasons as well, and to make sure it's in compliance. So detention without physical examination, you might get an alert for that. You need to be aware of what that is and what you should do. Prior notice requirements. You might be notified that for prior notice, you need to submit additional information that can be submitted to these government agencies well before your goods enter the market. Always try to have a plan. I cannot emphasize that enough because just acting blindly can be extremely costly. No one wants to do that. But when you have a plan that lists out these food safety standards, your labeling requirements, and what type of alerts that you need for compliance, you can have a checklist within your organization that ensures that you have everything that you need before you actually act. So I won't deep dive into this too much, but it was extremely important to have a screen on here that you can refer back to in your recording because you need to understand when this enacted. The FSMA started in January of 2011. It's been amended since then. The amended section is 415. Like I said before, do you need to memorize this? No. Should you read it and be familiar with it? You should, especially if you're in this for the long game. It requires food facilities to manufacture, process, pack, or hold food for U.S. consumption to provide additional registration details. We want to ensure that they can actually pass the FDA inspection process and have access. And I'm going to walk you through the documentation that gets exchanged shortly. But it also mandates biennial registration renewals. So you need to understand that as well if you have any registrations that you have to renew as well. So we are always thinking about safety when we're talking about FDA. We want to make sure that the goods that are coming into the US market do not pose a risk of causing serious health issues or death to humans or animals. So it was created for those reasons. So let's talk about the steps to get registered with the FDA. Step 1, register your facility with the FDA. Here is the website to do that. Step 2, identify product type and category. Select the appropriate product category and input the products that you will be importing. Step 3, identify the manufacturer of the product. And you must put their registration details on the products too. Next, provide accurate documentation, which may include a certificate of origin, product specs, and labeling information. Next, prior notice. Some products require prior notice to import into the United States. If that's the case, you have to get notice. Number 6, go back. I want to make sure you get that. Number 6, receive your UFI, your unique facility identifier. This allows you to track your import. Let's quickly go over these again. Step 1, register your facility with the FDA. Here's that website. Step 2, identify your product type and category. You want to select the appropriate product category and input the products that you'll be importing. Step 3, identify the manufacturer of the product. You must also have that manufacturer's registration detail for your products on the documentation. So make sure you're getting their establishment registration number as well. 4, provide accurate documents. We talked about COA a little bit in the beginning. That is your certificate of authentication. Product specs and labeling info. Prior notice. Some products require prior notice before they come into the US. Number 6, receive your UFI, your unique facility identifier. And that actual identifier, that number, you'll see it on documents throughout the process. So let's make sure you always have that. Now let's get into our case studies. It's important that if you're going to actually import goods into the US, I think that you need real examples that walk you through the process so you know what to expect. So we're going to walk into your case study now. I think you should have a pen and paper. This is really important. So let's say we are working with ABC Company. ABC Company is in South Africa and they want to import a food product out of South Africa into the US and be imported into the US market into the commerce for consumption. This is what you will receive from the FDA once you follow the steps we just went through. You just went through all those steps. What happens now? You are going to receive an email. The email is going to be from the Food Drug Facility Registration. The email should always end with fda.hss.gov. The subject will probably say first or second, third reminder, or initial notification in regard to the import agent, because you're going to have someone represent you. is going to outline the Department of Health and Human Services and their address. Of course, you'll have the date. I just made it today's date for a good example. We talked about what is CFR. CFR, we know, is the Code of Federal Regulations, and we talked about 21 CFR being distinct to FDA. So when you get a letter confirming your submission, they're going to quote the regulations that you have to be in compliance with. So you can easily find these for yourself and have them at your fingertips, but you should be working with a trade expert or your import agent to help you through this process. It'll have your facility name, it'll have your address, and it'll break down the address and information of the agent that you have listed. And I just put myself for now for easy reference. It's going to tell you what the instructions are for your agent. It says the U.S. agent has 10 days to respond. Sorry for the date. If no action is taken within 10 days of this date, the September 26th date, the registration information will be removed from the database and a whole new registration will need to be submitted. So this is what your import agent will receive. Again, it's going to say action required, initial agent assignment. This is the first time they contact your agent. It's also going to quote the regulations that you need to be in compliance with. It is going to outline ABC's company and address, the agent's information. Again, I just put myself there for easy reference. Again, where we are, 21 CFR 1.231A5. That's how you read that. And B7, exactly the way it's written. FDA will not confirm a registration or provide a registration number until the person identified as the U.S. agent for a foreign facility confirms that the person has agreed to serve the U.S. agent. Do not submit this to the FDA without confirming with the U.S. agent that they are in agreement. Because if I get this from FDA and I didn't agree to represent you in this way, I will go, where did this come from? I didn't agree to do this. So make sure that you're in agreement. Your agent is going to receive that. They're also going to receive this. Everything is very time specific because the time starts ticking immediately. They have 60 days to do whatever changes. Keep that in mind. Regulations in general are very strict when it comes to timelines. So let's start talking about USDA. USDA is not the same as FDA. They have their own rules, their own regulations, and they are the Department of Agriculture. They have key responsibilities. Their responsibilities is 1, to ensure hormone-free where required. 2, to ensure safety in animals as well. And also to ensure that the labeling for nutritional facts are there. So here's the relevance of the laws for USDA. So first thing we want to keep in mind is agriculture. The Act promotes marketing of agriculture to facilitate marketing in agricultural goods. They were enacted in 1966. The AWA provides the regulations for humane treatment of animals. Then we have the mandates for the inspection of meat products here to ensure that they are wholesome and correctly established. Then we have the FMIA. This act requires the processing of poultry goods, ensuring safety. Key regulatory areas to keep in mind. Your manufacturing process, because you have to ensure that you are prepared for inspection services. And when those facility inspections happen, you make sure that you are in compliance with whatever those regulatory areas are. You have to have your import permits for meat and poultry products and plant products. And lastly, you want to make sure that anything that is organic certified has the proper documentation and meet the requirements and labeling standards. Here's an overview of USDA. Keeping in mind, USDA and FDA are not the same. They are both OGAs or PGAs, as we've discussed. So to achieve compliance, we want to ensure that you have all the steps to achieve compliance. So what we've gone over is making sure that you understand the differences between the two and what's required. So here's your steps to achieve compliance when we're discussing the USDA. Know the regulations. Do you need to be an expert? No. Do you need to have someone that can guide you and support you? Absolutely. Research the law or have someone on your team that can do that. Take as many training sessions as you possibly can. The more you know, the better. You need to make sure your documentation is prepared properly so you can give the proper notice where required. Have your import permits, your certificate of analysis, which I said authenticity before. I apologize. It's certificates of analysis. Make sure your bill of lading and your commercial invoice is in compliance with customs and FDA and USDA. Commercial invoice requirements can be found in 19 CFR. And there is a list of every requirement to have your commercial invoice listed properly. Product testing, labeling requirements. Make sure you have your nutritional facts. We've discussed that. Ensuring product registration with FDA and USDA. And lastly, preparing for your inspection. We talked about this. I won't go into it heavily again, but we talked about the importance of compliance because you don't want to have an impact on your company financially that could be extremely costly and potentially even put you out of business. We want to avoid fines and penalties. We want to minimize delays because you want to get to market as smoothly as possible within the time frame to meet your buyer's demand. Enhance your market to access. You want to build trust with your customers, and you can do that with the partnerships of your buyers. And you want to build long-term financial health. So as we begin to close out, let me walk you through what is the Modernization Act, also the Mod Act, but for customs, which you can find in 19 CFR. And what that means is that your licensed customs broker is not the person that is responsible for ensuring all of your compliance. The importer of record is. Your importer of record has responsibilities to submit your prior notice requirements. They also are required to notify FDA before your shipment arrives. They should be providing this 2 hours before arrival by land or sea or 4 by air. They should require to provide all the details about your product and shipping information. And then they tell you the consequences of noncompliance. Record keeping requirements are generally 5 years. You want to ensure that you have all your documentation in the event that customs wants to review them, or you get what's called a CF-28, which is a request for information, and you need to have all your documentation and your records available to answer any question that customs has. Your responsibilities for your IOR, which is the importer of record, is to ensure compliance with all regulations, cooperate with inspections and audits. So they are supposed to support you in this entire capacity. See them as your partner. And keep in mind that your IOR are the ones that actually are the ones that take more of the liability and responsibility in regard to making sure that they're the ones that's in compliance as well, because customs is going to actually come to them for any type of issues to ensure that they are being reconciled timely and in compliance. So again, we know already about our penalties. Those are the challenges that are usually faced. Financial penalties are a major challenge. Product seizures, we've talked about all of this. These are the things that you want to avoid. Here are your most common challenges. We've talked about every last one of these. These are just a recap. You want to make sure that you have a full plan to be aligned with what you see on your screen right now. Here's our webinar recap. Here's the SHAC breakdown. Number 1, importance of understanding regulations. Number 2, practical steps to ensure compliance. Number 3, navigating challenges and being proactive. Knowing the basics to what regulations that you will need to be in compliance with. 19 CFR, 21 CFR, 22 CFR. That's all can be overwhelming. Have someone on your team or a facilitator that can advise you, so that way you don't have to figure that out on your own. PGAs are not the same as customs. Terminology matters. You want to be able to talk the talk, to walk the walk. You want to avoid fines, penalties, and seizures that are damaging to your business. And lastly, you want to avoid supply chain delays because they are extremely costly. Thank you for your time here with Shaquana Teasley, also known as the Shack Breakdown. And now I'm available to answer any questions that you have.
Hi, Shaq. Thank you very much. I'm just going to read a question that we've got from Afyong. The question was, Shaq, isn't it best to engage an agent from the start to assist with complying to all the regulations?
Yes, an agent and or a trade expert, sometimes they support each other and work together. You want to make sure that you have a partnership or some type of relationship in the very early stages of your transactions. Yes.
And that was the only question that we received through the Q&A section. Ladies and gentlemen, is there anything else that you'd like to ask Shaq while we have her time today? Okay, Susan, I will give you your microphone access. Susan, can you hear us? Susan? Susan? I think you're on mute still. Okay, we'll wait for him to come back. Is there anybody else that would like to ask Shaq a question while we have her? And then also just a reminder to please, if you've got a 1 minute or 2 minutes, just to complete the poll section of our webinar. We would greatly appreciate the feedback of what you thought about the webinar and the questions. Okay, I have another person here, Anne Tomba. I'll allow your microphone. Anne, can you hear us? Anne? Anne?
Hello.
Oh, yes, there you
go.
go.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. Can we please have Shaq's contact details? Because when we email your guys, we never get a response. I have not been able to download any of the sessions. I've attended all. And when we email to ask for a link to where to get those information, we don't get any response. So please, can I have the contact details of all the presenters as well as where to download all the sessions? Because this is very important and I really, really need this information. Thank you.
So if I heard her correctly, she was asking where can she find the replays? You can find that on the U.S. Africa Trade Desk. She says she wanted to know how to get in touch with anyone because the information is very important in regard to the presenters that's been here throughout the series of these webinars. If you can see the screen right now, you can see how to get in touch with us. It gives you a QR code to how you can join our network. It also gives you a phone number, an address, and an email address of how to get in touch with us directly.
Did that answer your question, Anne? Okay, I've got another. Pardon, Anne, yes? Did that answer your question?
No, it doesn't, because I have emailed after every session and I have not received any response.
Okay, Anne, I'll put my email address in the chat and I will get back to you.
Okay, I've tried to actually put a Q&A, but it's saying that the Q&A was not set up for this meeting. So maybe it's I don't know. But my email address is Anne with an E at yagispice.com.
And I've just sent you my email address as well. I'll put it in the Q&A section of the webinar.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got another 4 minutes. So what I'll do is I will give Eric some voice time and time to ask a question. Eric? Eric, are you there? Okay, I've got no response from Eric at this point in time. I just want to try Sugen again. Sugen, can you hear us? Do you still have a question to ask Shaq? Okay. Shaq, is there anything that you'd want to maybe just recap for the last 3 minutes or so?
Yes, I think that it would be best to just leave this screen here as well. I think that some of the things that seems very minor are not, right? I think that it's very important to understand the terminology. Oftentimes when people call or they send emails, their question is difficult to understand because they don't know the proper terminology to ask the right question. So as you download the QR code that we had in the beginning for the acronyms, I think that'll help you significantly. You want to be able to ask the question when people actually know how to help. I know sometimes that's better expressed verbally, but we're in a digital age where many things are just done digitally. It is important to have the correct partnerships and working with a team of people that can provide guidance throughout the entire transaction. I want to highly emphasize that it is not to your benefit to submit to any government agency that someone is working on your behalf in the US or stating that they're going to support you without first getting their confirmation. Because if you submit that and the agent or trade expert on the US side has not been in agreement, they do not want to put themselves at risk of doing your documentation without having formal agreements with you directly. So let's not take that lightly. I think that there are so many opportunities through the US Africa Trade Desk, US Aid and Prosper Africa, and the initiative that is being put at the forefront as an opportunity. And this is a great time to ensure that you're taking advantage of that so you can have the support that you need throughout the entire supply chain process.
Okay, Shaq, we do have one gentleman that popped in a question here, Dianga. He or she says that I feel the presentation was heavily skewed towards food products. What about accessories, jewelry, etc.?
The topic of today's webinar was navigating regulatory matters distinct to USDA and FDA. So it was definitely skewed that way because that was what the topic was.
Okay. I don't see any other questions here. There's a couple for everybody that would like to access today's webinar and the previous webinars that we've launched. Please go to our website, which is usatd.org, and go to the events section. Under the events section, go to past events and then select the webinar that you would like to see the recording on. It's a YouTube link, and then you can open that and watch all the webinars that you've previously missed. And going forward, you can find the upcoming webinars there as well.
Thank you.
I think we're done for the day. Thank you, everybody. I hope everybody has also had the time to complete our poll section. We appreciate your feedback, and we look forward to webinar 6.
Thank you very much for having me.
Retail experts. Yes. Thank you very much, Shaq. Thank you.
Thank you.